On this 2.7 EcoBoost F150 P0404 is an electric EGR code. In plain terms, the PCM may be seeing the EGR valve in a position that does not match what it commanded. The truck may just have a check engine light, or it can have drivability complaints depending on when the EGR fault shows up. The broad possible fault areas are the EGR valve and its circuits, related airflow or pressure inputs, and, less often, the controller side. Start with the basic system checks, then keep the diagnosis structured so you do not condemn the EGR assembly before the wiring and connector checks are done. With the ignition on, check which faults are actually present. For P0404, follow the electric EGR diagnostic path into the connector and circuit checks. If other EGR-related codes are present, do not read the whole list out loud or shotgun the same test for all of them. Check what those codes mean first, because some of them branch to a different part of the diagnostic routine. For this episode, we are staying focused on P0404. Next, check the EEGR connector. Make sure the terminals are clean, seated correctly, and not creating an intermittent connection. If the code is intermittent, wiggle the harness and connector while you are taking measurements. If the connector is not clean or seated correctly, repair that issue as necessary. Clear the PCM-DTCs and repeat the self-test. If the connector checks good on this 2.7 EcoBoost, continue with the electrical checks in order. If the diagnostic path calls for the EGR circuit open, check with the ignition on, disconnect the EEGR assembly connector and make the voltage decision before moving on. The question is whether the voltage is greater than 10.5 V. If it is greater than 10.5 V, continue to the resistance open check. If it is not, repair the open circuit, clear the PCM-DTCs and repeat the self-test. Turn the ignition off, disconnect the EEGR assembly connector, and disconnect the PCM connector. On the 2.7 EcoBoost, check resistance between C1682 pin 4 and C1232 E pin 2, then between C1682 pin 5 and C1232 E pin 23. The resistance needs to be less than 5 ohms. If it is not less than 5 ohms, repair the open circuit, clear the PCM-DTCs, and repeat the self-test. If both legs are less than 5 ohms, continue with the short checks. Now keep the connectors disconnected and work through the short checks in order. First, check the EGR circuits for a short to ground at C1682 pin 4 and C1682 pin 5. Each check should show greater than 10,000 ohms. If not, repair the short circuit, clear the PCM-DTCs, and repeat the self-test. Next, check for a short between the two EGR circuits by measuring between C1682 pin 4 and C1682 pin 5. That also needs to be greater than 10,000 ohms. If it is not, repair the short circuit, clear the PCM-DTCs, and repeat the self-test. Then turn the ignition on and check for voltage at C1682 pin 4 and C1682 pin 5. If any voltage is present, repair the short circuit, clear the PCM-DTCs, and repeat the self-test. If no voltage is present, go to the EGR coil check. With the ignition off, measure the EGR coil resistance on the component side between C1682 pin 4 and C1682 pin 5. The resistance should be between 1900 ohms. If the resistance is outside that range, install a new electric exhaust gas recirculation assembly, clear the PCM-DTCs, and repeat the self-test. If the coil resistance is in range, reconnect and verify whether the concern is still present. There is also a MAP sensor operation branch in this electric EGR routine. With the ignition on, monitor the PCM MAP PID and K-PA, record the value, start the engine and record it again. The expected decision is that the MAP PID value is higher than 69 K-PA 10 psi, with the ignition on, engine OFF, and lower than 69 K-PA 10 psi, with the ignition on, engine running. If it meets that pattern, the concern is not present at this time, so make sure the MAP sensor is correctly seated and the vacuum source is not restricted. Then clear the PCM-DTCs and repeat the self-test. If it does not meet that pattern, carry out the key on, engine running self-test. If the related EEGR flow fault comes back, leave this P0404 path and continue with the appropriate flow diagnosis path. If it does not come back, continue with symptom-based direction instead of guessing. If the diagnosis branches into the EEGR position feedback and reference side, start with VREF and signal return. With the ignition off, disconnect the EEGR assembly connector, then turn the ignition on. On the 2.7 EcoBoost, measure voltage between C1682 pin 3 and C1682 pin 1. The voltage should be between 5V. If it is not in that range, move into the reference voltage and signal return diagnosis before continuing. If it is in range, turn the ignition off, disconnect the PCM connector, and check the EGOV circuit between C1682 pin 2 and C175E pin 47. That resistance needs to be less than 5 ohms. If not, repair the open circuit, clear the PCM-DTCs, and repeat the self-test. Then check the EGOV circuit for a short to ground at C1682 pin 2. The resistance should be greater than 10,000 ohms. If it is not, repair the short circuit, clear the PCM-DTCs, and repeat the self-test. Finally, turn the ignition on and check C1682 pin 2 for voltage. If any voltage is present, repair the short circuit, clear the PCM-DTCs, and repeat the self-test. If no voltage is present, go back to the final operation check. Reconnect the EEGR assembly connector and the PCM connector. Then verify whether the concern is still present. If the concern is still present after the circuit checks have passed, install a new electric exhaust gas recirculation assembly, clear the PCM-DTCs, and repeat the self-test. If the concern is no longer present, the system is operating correctly at this time, and the issue may have been caused by a loose or corroded connector. The key on P0404 is to prove the command and feedback path before making the parts call. Connector condition: opens, shorts to ground, shorts between circuits, shorts to voltage, EEGR coil resistance, and then final verification. If the wiring checks pass and the concern remains, the test path points to the EEGR assembly. For more diagnostic training, visit stepdiagnostics.com.